what exactly is faith-based civilization in the 21st century?
I would say we're going to build 22nd century civilization. If we're trying to build 22nd century Islam, it's going to look different from what we know. And that means we have to be willing and open to have our perception of our religion be questioned. Islam doesn't exist except within a cultural context. There is no Islam without culture, but Islam is not culture. Islam exists within a culture. Imagine the scene, right? It's Eid Day, and this group of Ethiopians, Abyssinians, are in the masjid, are in Masjid Nabawi of all places, and they've got their spears in their hands, and they're dancing and they're moving in the masjid. And what happens when you say that? People are like, oh yeah, but you know, it mustn't represent the dancing of other people. Rigid, calcified understandings of Islam existing within our cultural context, especially brown people who just don't know how to dance, especially you know, like us Indians and Desis, Pakistanis, right? We just, let's be truthful, right? You heard it here first on the In Good Faith podcast. I have no doubt within 5, no more than 10 years, there's going to be an absolute entire shift in the way the average person will understand reality and understand truth and life after death.
Is it officially just Bilal Hassam now?
I'm still on the GMC, General Medical Council register, without a license to practice medicine.
Okay.
But I'm there, you can find me.
So does that mean officially we can call you Dr. Bilal?
Well, I use it insofar as it helps me get stuff. So sometimes I'm like, you know, I'm complaining on a customer service line, then I'm Dr. Hassam.
All right, fine. Well, we'll honor you with that title in honor of all those painful hours, days, and months and years.
They weren't painful.
Yeah. Oh, they weren't? No, you enjoyed it?
I enjoyed it, yeah. I slept through med school, man. It was a good time.
It was a good time. But that was a long time ago. I'm really pleased that you're here for this podcast. It'll be one of the first episodes to go out. You've just come off a flight, but you're looking good as ever.
I'm trying my best.
So where have you dropped in from?
I flew in from Toronto, and I was in the US before that. So I was in Washington DC and Baltimore for about 3-4 days, and before that I was in Toronto. So spent a week in Toronto, a few days in the States, back to Toronto, and here to London for 12 hours, and then off to South Africa.
South Africa, and that's where you've been living for the last, it's been a couple of years now?
3 years.
3 years,
yeah, just over 3 years now. Made it at home, alhamdulillah, pretty settled.
Yeah. So that's it for the foreseeable future?
Yeah, foreseeable future. It's been an interesting journey being in South Africa. Yeah, so I think we'll be there for a while.
Cool. All right, well, we'll talk about that. There's a lot of different things we can talk about. I know you're into your AI, you're into your art, your culture, leadership. One of the things that I saw, written in, I think the sort of brochure of your Muslim agency, which you're running at the moment, is that you're interested in exploring faith-based civilization in the 21st century. So what exactly is faith-based civilization in the 21st century?
Well, I would say we're going to build 22nd century civilization.
Okay.
And, we as Muslims, people who have arrived in the West, by and large, have come through economic migration, whether it's in America as professionals or, our parents came without the intention of really establishing religion or being inspired by their faith. It wasn't the leading sort of driver. But our parents' generation had to deal with whatever they had to deal with. And we've been afforded this space now to really think about what is our place in society, what are we doing? And wherever Islam went, it indigenized. It was part and parcel of the culture, the people. When you go to Turkey, it's Turkish. You go to Morocco, it's Morocco. When you go to Morocco, it's Moroccan. Mm-hmm. And, a lot of the growing pains that we've experienced in the UK, in the US, wherever, it's around that indigenization process. And I think we're part of that generation that's trying to define what the role of faith is for our lives and our society, and ultimately imbue our societies with beauty and God-centricness. And there isn't a place, it's hard not to be objective, but there isn't a place where Islam came to that it didn't benefit the people. And it wasn't just taken and adopted by the people. And I think that's where I'm trying to focus and trying to help us look in a bigger way and not just focus in our sort of little space in communities.
So what could things look like? What's the vision here exactly? So we're 2025, I know looking out even 1 year seems like a difficult task nowadays, but if you're looking out, decades ahead, just in terms of where things could be, what the positive effect or the influence of faith, devotion to God could be in society, especially for a society where, well, maybe until very recently, because there's been a slight change. Godlessness has been on the rise. Secularism has been sort of on the rise. Atheism. Recently, it seems like that's changing a little bit. I don't know if you've seen that, but there's been reports about church attendance and Bible sales amongst young people starting to like skyrocket all of a sudden. That's interesting. But yeah, where's this all going in your view?
Yeah, I mean, it's less about the form and more about the principles and ethics and values. And I think, especially, and it ties into all the AI stuff, that there's that project. What's his name? Sam Altman, OpenAI. He's got this crypto project, which is basically connected to the idea of a universal basic income. Because if and when these AI companies achieve what they want to achieve, they're gonna basically, like, a lot of work is going to become redundant. And I feel this whole AI space is massively underhyped. It's underhyped in terms of what's really coming and how massive the shifts are going to be. And then what the experts in the space are talking about is that there's going to be a crisis of meaning and purpose. There was a really telling interview probably about a year ago when Elon Musk was asked by a journalist, like, well, if you invent this AI that can do your job better than you, what would you do? And he sort of sits there for a moment and he's like, I guess I'd spend more time with my family, but I don't like to think about that. And it was just really kind of sad. And this is like, people are starving for purpose, starving for meaning, things that we just take for granted, that we have this incredible, comprehensive, empowering, beautiful way of living. And, coming to the earlier point, something that there's an essay written by Dr. Omar Farooq Abdullah 20 years ago, and it's been really sort of seminal to so much of what I've done. And in that essay, he opens with this beautiful analogy where he says, Islam is like a crystal clear flowing river whose waters are sweet and pure and life-giving, but it has no color of its own. And instead, it takes on the color of the bedrock it flows above. So in China, Islam looks Chinese. In Mali, Islam looks African, African. And the point is that Islam is not concerned ultimately with form as much as it's concerned with principles and ethics and values that take on different cultural manifestations. So there is no Islamic dress. There's Islamic principles, Islamic ethics in dress. The ethic is modesty. The ethics is beauty. It's not to have israf, not to show off and be extravagant, to be clean. What that looks like in different places and spaces is going to be different. What modesty is in a village in India is different to what modesty is in New York. And so, religious spaces are where some people are some of the time, but cultural spaces are where most people are most of the time. The fact that, whoever's watching this podcast, this is a moment of culture. We're speaking story and narrative. So when we can move from being consumers of culture to be producers of culture. And I always give the example of, have you been to Topkapi Palace?
Yeah.
Yeah. So like, you've probably seen that, like, they have this, the Quran, the Mus'haf that Uthman radiallahu anh was reading when he was stabbed, and his blood is stained on the pages. And, that original Quran is just it's very basic, simple lettering, right? There's no harakah, there's no numbers. And if you just look up, you'll see all this elaborate Sultan Ahmed calligraphy. And then how did you get from there to there? Like, imagine the audacity of these Ottomans to take the most sacred part of their religion. Like the Quran, like, you don't mess with the Quran of all things, right? And they put all these swirls and twirls, and they make something so beautiful, and non-Muslims tattooing it on their bodies. So imagine how much ownership they felt over their religion. And it wouldn't have been, the big sheikhs and muftis. This would have been young people, artisans, creatives, or disruptors who knew themselves, knew their culture, and felt comfortable and had enough ownership over their faith to reimagine it. So when you ask me what's it going to look like, I don't know what it's going to look like, but I know what it's going to feel like. And inshallah, it's going to feel wholesome. It'll feel beautiful. It'll feel inspiring. And it will feel, you can have like this angry right-wing Hindutva troll in India, spewing out racism, and his profile picture is a Taj Mahal. And he's like, he claims that is his. And that speaks to the genius of those Mughals, that they produced culture that everyone felt they could take ownership over. And I think that's the challenge, and that's where we have to rise to that. And I have no doubt that it's coming.
In a British context, how is that sort of agenda been progressing in your eyes? Like, are you seeing, how would you sort of characterize like the progress that has been made in this kind of culture production, and what are the sort of untapped areas of future production?
Yeah, I think it's happening anyway. It happens organically. And I think, unfortunately, our religious leadership and institutions can often be just playing catch up. There was an interesting survey. In the Hanafi madhab, they have levels of makruh, of what's disliked. So there's a category of makruh tahrimi, things, it's something that's disliked. It's very close to haram. It's like really, really disliked. And then you have makruh tanzihi, which is like lightly disliked. And you shouldn't do it, but it's okay. So they did a survey of Indian scholars on the opinion that they held about shellfish. And it just so happened that all of the Indian scholars who lived inland, considered shellfish makruh tahrimi. And all of the Indian scholars who lived on the coast considered shellfish makruh tanzihi, like it's lightly disliked. So is that coincidence? Or are you responding to the context in which you're in? And the response is always going to be a point of tension. So by definition, the Islam that is going to thrive, that is going to be part and parcel and be perceived as and owned by this entire country, is going to look different, sound different, smell different. It's Nadia Hussein's fish finger lasagna. It's Yusuf Islam being in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. It's Cross and Inshallah, in the Premier League. And so these moments are all happening, and I feel there's a bit of a disconnect between where the majority of the Muslim community is and when we're seeing these points of culture emerge. So I think there's an interesting conversation at play, and I think what we need to do is be more confident in driving that, being comfortable at the edges and the fringes where things are changing. And I'm excited to see what comes.
Do you think it matters whether these cultural kind of contributions stem more from an experience of Islam or being Muslim that is more ethnocultural, as opposed to an understanding that is more clearly sort of God-centered, if you like? Because there is that kind of tension which we're navigating as well.
Well, they're not just mutual. Well, I would say they're not mutually exclusive. Well, actually, no. Actually, and we get this wrong all the time. Islam doesn't exist except within a cultural context. There is no Islam without culture, but Islam is not culture. Islam exists within a culture. So the culture of the Prophet ﷺ was, 7th century Arabia, and and there's sort of historic Islam and there's transhistoric Islam. And a beautiful sort of moment to sort of unpack, and I'm actually writing about this right now, is this moment. Imagine the scene, right? It's Eid Day, and this group of Ethiopians, Abyssinians, are in the masjid, are in Masjid Nabawi of all places, and they've got their spears in their hands, and they're dancing and they're moving in the masjid. And what happens? Umar radiallahu anh, instinctively moves to intervene. Perhaps he's worried about the sanctity of the space, or he represents this sort of austere understanding of what is proper Islamic behavior. But what's the response? The Prophet Muhammad, he immediately intervenes, stops Omar, and then encourages the Abyssinians. He says, continue, go on, O Banu Arifda. And, this is a moment of cultural specificity asserting itself in the nascent multicultural ummah. And then, the famous story, Aisha comes up and, he facilitates her viewing. She looks up on his shoulders so she can see. And then the Prophet specifies the theological, philosophical, intellectual underpinnings. He says, so that the Christians and Jews know that there is fusha, there's latitude, there's expansiveness in our religion. I mean, it's amazing. Now, what's the Sunnah defined as? The Sunnah is defined as the sayings, actions, and approvals of the Prophet, right? So it is absolutely categorically correct to say that Sunnah is Sunnah to dance. And that probably sits uncomfortable with a lot of people. This is Africans in the masjid, in Masjid Nabawi of all places, dancing on Eid Day, and there's percussion and drumming. So that's from the Prophet's Sunnah, and he defended it and he encouraged it. And what happens when you say that? People are like, oh yeah, but but you know, it mustn't represent the dancing of other people, and you can't mix the genders, and you know, well, you can't, and we move quickly to police, and we have to ask ourselves: is the discomfort and the urgency to police cultural expressions of joy, does it actually stem from our own rigid, calcified understandings of Islam existing within our cultural context, especially brown people who just don't know how to dance, especially, you know, like us Indians and Desis, Pakistanis, right? We just, let's be truthful, right? I mean, as in our generation, we've got a great history of dance in our cultures. Does it represent that same voice and concern that Omar exemplified, but was ultimately corrected? And and I put it to especially the more literalist interpreters of our deen. If you want to follow the Quran and Sunnah, show me how they danced. Let's see it. You want to follow the Sunnah? Only the early generations, first 3 generations. So they were all Sahaba. I've never seen a dance in the masjid by, I've seen some dances in masjids, like you go to Cricklewood Mosque on Rabiul Awal, you see Sheikh Babakar, getting down with the Sudani dance, and it's beautiful, and they're singing and they're doing dhikr, and it's like there's a hadra, and it's joyful. You won't see that in normative Islam, like what we consider mainstream Islam. So, well, who's following the Sunnah and who's not? So there's so much in our religion, and that story deserves so much unpacking. This is in Sahih Hadith. You can't dispute it. And so, the future is going to look different. It's going to sound different, and we have to create that space.
In your understanding, was there a time when there was more of this open cultural kind of expression in our tradition or history, in a way that is more reflective of what you think is true normative kind of faith?
Yeah, I think what we have now is really a deviation from Islamic civilization. We lament, the ending of the Muslim world or the empire or whatever, 1924. But look back to those civilizations, Andalusia or the Ottomans or Mughal India, or you see this whole rich diversity of expression of Islam and the mixing of other traditions and faiths. And, I was just talking to someone about like hijab, for example, and there's a sort of, the sisters will be way more familiar, right? But there's a sort of like a meme with like if you have like just 1 or 2 strands of hair, people are astaghfirullah, sister, what are you doing? And these like special caps that women wear now, they didn't exist until very recently, like elasticated, special manufactured stuff. And there was a scholar who was teaching us, and he was talking about, like, he was looking at Egyptian folk poetry from like 6-7 centuries ago, and this poet was writing about when your scarf fell down and your hair revealed itself on the field, and he was it was like a beauty love poem, whatever. If you're working in most societies were agricultural, and so men and women would be working the land, and there's no way that your hair would be like this, only the modern age can facilitate that. And yet we're so artificial in how we erect these boundaries of like, and what the point is about modesty, and modesty comes first from the heart, not your dress. And so, we just obsess about externalities, maybe as a distraction from addressing things inside. And you look at the diversity of Islamic civilization, just a bowl that we would drink from is so beautiful. You find it in the British Museum. What do they use it for? Drinking water. And yet they beautified it. And it comes to something else that also Dr. Omar Farooq Abdullah has this quote where he says, Allah is the absolutely real. And as we approach him, we become more real. And then internally, we become beautiful. And then everything we do becomes beautiful. And so a society that is close to God is by definition beautiful. There's a connection between our ethics and aesthetics. And the word ihsan refers to an excellence or beauty of the eye. There's a visual beauty to ihsan. And you can see it. If you see like a true man or woman of God, they're beautiful in the way they compose themselves, in the way they dress, in the way they walk, the way they talk. You can see it on someone's face, like the nur of their face. They look beautiful. And so and the converse is true. A society that is far from God looks ugly. And so there's a direct connection between truth, between faith, and between beauty, and between civilization. And this is our contribution in the past, and it's our contribution, inshallah, in the future. We just got to get there.
Yeah, for as long as I've sort of known you, and I've always felt you've had a more or quite an expansive sort of understanding or appreciation of what is, let's say, appropriate or what should be happening. But in your assessment, then, because obviously when people hear this kind of thing, and some maybe viewers or listeners, some of this might be shocking them a little bit. They might be wondering why I'm not
cancel Iqbal now.
Yo, cancel you, or well, listen, we can both get cancelled together, yeah. But how do you think about the boundaries? Because obviously, however big the field is, there's still some parameters, some limits. So what is a healthy way to think about? There's still the idea of God consciousness. There's still the idea of the fear of God. There's still the idea of limits at some level, right? Like it's not everything goes, because this is the binary within which people unfortunately think, right? Like, oh, now that you're saying that, well, that means that everything's fine. So how do you yourself think about like the sort of parameters, boundaries, limits in a way that you feel the expressions of culture and art, etc., are remaining, God conscious and are not just reflections of ego?
Just firstly on art, art isn't this thing that we just, entertain ourselves with or muse. I think it's the author Seth Godin who writes. His books are great, and he says that to be human is to be an artist. Everything we do is art, and he defines art as the unique mark that you can put on something. The unique thing, that your unique way of doing something, when you bring yourself in your truest self to something, that's art. The way you pour a cup of tea can be art. The way you open a door can be art. So everything we do is art in that sense. And if it's rooted in, he's talking more in a secular framework. But I think when you're really coming from your heart, I think the French. I used to learn a bit of French. The French, they say, "Si il sort de la cœur, il arrive à la cœur." If it leaves from the heart, it arrives at the heart. And that's true for our tradition. So I think if we can, if we're working on ourselves and with this constant sort of effort to better ourselves and to be sincere. And, I was talking to a singer just on the plane. I met a friend, one of these Nashidi guys going from Toronto to DC. And we were talking about art and music and singing, and the best artists, the best singers, they're able to access a deep part of themselves and go really into a vulnerable space, and it's really difficult. And it's actually like, my wife is a British Palestinian, and I told her, for our wedding, look, I know you Arabs like to, jiggy and jive, but it's just not my thing. And my dad's a bit of a Molvi type, and he's he won't really like it. And she's like, no, cool, I understand. And then come my wedding day, like all the friggin' bride side decide to get up and start their little Arab dabka, and then it was just a whole massive like dance. And I was like initially like, what's going on? Then they pull me into it. Then they pull my dad into it, and all my dad's Molvi friends were all like dabkaing, and it was a proper like sight. And but it was so beautiful. It was tasteful. And to dance is to be free in your body and to dance from your heart. It's a really hard thing to do, because you have to like break through ego a lot. And so that process of like,
it's letting go.
Yeah, you're letting go, and that's a very sacred thing. So yeah, I forgot your question, man.
No, his question was about you kind of went the other way. The question was to do with, I think, parameters, limits, boundaries.
Yeah, if you're driving a car and you're obsessed about the curb, you're gonna hit the curb. Like we're so focused on now the curb is the boundary for the road, and without roads we're not going to go anywhere, right? Like it's going to be haywire. So we need roads, and the curb is helpful. And when you hit it, you kind of know in a way, right? The halal bayina wal haram bayina. The halal, what's permissible is clear, and what's impermissible is clear. And our religion is way more expansive than we think it is. The Prophet ﷺ not only, like we just said it, he encouraged dancing in the masjid. Like, come on. And we're so like obsessed, and not to say like the rules aren't there. Allah will protect his religion, and I just think so much of the objection that we have is not rooted in embodying the rules per se, as much as it's coming from our own prejudices and our own ossified mindsets. They said of Imam Malik that he rarely saw people do wrong because he just had a good opinion of people. And having a good opinion of people is such a blessing. It's such a wonderful way to live your life. There's a famous story of two men who met in the middle of the night, and one of them had just been to a brothel and had been sleeping with a prostitute, and the other was just leaving his house and he was on his way to the mosque to pray the night prayer. And so the one who'd been to a brothel, as they passed, the one who'd been to a brothel looked at the other one and thought, what a disgusting human being, what a horrible person, what a foul human he is. And the one who was going to the masjid, he looked at the other guy and thought, mashallah, what an amazing guy, this guy's just been at the masjid. And so they walked past each other not saying a word. Look what worlds they lived in. Like we choose the world we live in. And there's having a good opinion is something which is rooted in our tradition. There's a famous line that says, if you see your brother's beard dripping in wine, assume that someone threw it to him. And if you see your brother declaring, Ana Rabbukul A'la, I am your Lord the Most High, assume he's reading the verse in the Quran where Allah says, I am your Lord the Most High. You won't go wrong with that. And I've really tried to embody that myself. The most common phrase in my house, in my marriage, is Hakuna Matata. No worries. It means no worries.
Well, you're in Africa now, so you've got no choice.
Yeah.
I definitely.
And that's not to say there isn't rules. The Sharia is clear that we have boundaries, and boundaries enable us to they free us. And you have a completely open society with no boundaries. You have chaos and you have a lack of innovation. So the rules are there, but if you look in our tradition, there is so much more than you can possibly imagine.
Sure.
I mean, it's shocking. Like, we can talk about it later, but I'm writing something I'm working on a program on sex education, and bro, the stuff we've got in our tradition, it'll make a lot of people blush. Yeah.
Okay, we may or may not get there today, but but just to echo what you were saying before around the issue of non-judgment, I think definitely the kind of in many pockets of our community, the kind of culture is a highly judgmental kind of has been a highly judgmental kind of culture. And
but I think it's a mindset because if we're trying to build 22nd century Islam, it's going to look different from what we know. And that means we have to be willing and open to have our perception of our religion be questioned. And so it's kind of like, when, and this is, look at the amazing story of Malcolm X, that he has a perception of religion and he goes to a space when he travels for the Hajj and he sees all these different ways of Islam expressed, and he has the courage to reinvent his understanding of the religion deep, and that enables so much. So we have to have that same approach. We have to be captors of the truth and not capture truth. Truth doesn't serve us. We serve truth wherever it takes us.
Maybe another way to ask the previous question is that, what would you say? I mean, if you were, and maybe you have had, right? But if you were to have the opportunity from a place of genuine concern to express your worries about modern secular culture, what are the issues? What's gone wrong? What's the issue in society that means that now actually some sort of faith-based kind of approach needs to come into it?
The way I'd approach that is less less focus on the form again, and focus more on principles, and focus more on there's so many things wrong with everything, So it's about return to values, return to principles, and people align with that. No one's disagreeing with you. Does that make sense?
To a degree, but I think you mentioned earlier about the fact that there's an alignment between faith, truth, beauty, right, and then I suppose concurrently that there would be then a correlation between the absence of faith and then falsehood and then ugliness, right? So your attempt or your hope for a faith-based type of civilizational development, let's say, in what we call, quote unquote, the West, would presuppose that there is an issue here at hand. So I'm just trying to. I'm interested in what you think are like what are the actual societal problems, if you like, that then that we're going to bring some value into.
Yeah, I mean, again, there's so many issues, and it's easy to point to, oh, look at these
No, I don't mean in necessarily a critical
Yeah,
way, but it's
yeah.
just even just as objectively as it can be done. What's the
I think for me, ultimately,
what would you? I suppose what if you were trying to convey this? You're trying to sort of because one thing we're all, well, I wouldn't say we're very good at, but what one thing we tend to do, within our community is speak to our own, and we kind of only speak to our own often most of the time. Like most of our dialogue is internal,
Mhm.
yeah, which has its place. What I find that we're just not very good at, and most of us are not very even equipped to do, it seems, is to somehow translate literally and metaphorically what it is that we want to say to wider society so that people can appreciate the value or the proposition and consider an alternative, which is like obviously, prophetic sort of example 101, really. So it's almost, yeah, I'm trying to understand, if you, given that opportunity, how is it that you would sort of lay it on the table, essentially, and just say, well, actually, at a principle level, yes, it needs to be something which is lived in a culture and is seen and perceived, and people coming through many routes and doors and through friendships and through observation of all sorts of, cultural and other type of, projects, endeavors. But at a principle level, at just a conceptual level, what is it that, I suppose what I'm asking is, why should someone consider faith in today's day and age?
I mean, to be honest, like I'll answer the question as best I can in that there is an objective truth, right? I believe in an objective truth, and I also believe that objective truth is beyond principles in that it will directly and tangibly benefit people. And there's nothing in our deen, there's nothing in our religion that anyone can say or objectively would be bad for you. And there's I think there's a principle in fiqh about it, like that there's nothing that we're commanded to do that isn't good and beneficial for us, and nothing that we're told to stay away from that is harmful for us. And even the Quran, it talks about the benefits of alcohol, but the overall the decision is no, it's not permissible because the overall harm is greater than the potential benefit that it might give. So I think, but for me again, it's less about the principle, and it's more like let the beauty, let the truth, let the light shine, and until we're embodying that spirit, then we don't really have a claim. We can claim, everyone can claim, I got the best ideas, I got the secrets to the universe.
No, of course, yeah.
But if you're just sat there in your little, ivory tower or little kebab shop, it's not good enough, and people will vote by their feet. And this is the history of our faith. And again, I'm encouraged by what I see. Someone told me, I think a scholar told me, he said, if the light of the worst believer was to manifest on the earth, it would fill the earth and the heavens with light. So the power of faith is incredible. And I was talking to my wife, and I was talking to someone else about what's happening in Gaza, and so many of us have been moved and struck by what we've seen. But in the same way, I was also like, what is a choice for a Gazan? Like, your choice is embrace shaheed, embrace martyrdom, essentially, or be a coward and run away. It's kind of like a very easy choice. Like, you be a coward and you collude and and I believe most Muslims who are put in that space and put in that context would be the same. They'd actually be the same. But we're just not tested like that. So in a way, the Gazans have it easy, that Allah's just made it very simple for them. And they're like, yeah, we're going to walk this path of faith and we'll meet you on the other side. And what's harder is for us to get into that same mindset. One of my teachers, he said, if I ask who's ready to die for Islam, he said, I have a long queue outside my home. And I believe it. Most people, if they take a bullet for their faith, they'd be like, yeah, I'll do it. I'm ready to die. You're willing to take a bullet for your family. You're willing to die for your family. Yeah, willing to die for your belief in God. Yes. And then the Sheikh said, when I ask who's willing to live for Islam, then everyone disappears.
So what's going on there then?
Because it's easy to be a martyr. It's easy. I'm not to belittle it, right? But it's like an easy choice, especially if you believe like I'm going to head to a good place, inshallah. Well, why not? It's hard. It's harder to live it and manifest it. It's not easy, right? So that's the challenge, and we've got to, and if you look at the degrees and the stations of of believers, the martyr, the shaheed is like here. There's degrees and degrees above it. And I remember one teacher said to me, he said, Bilal, the maqams of human beings were created for you and me to ascend. So like, let's do, like it's not for like these secret, esoteric super sheikhs in the mountains. No, it's for us. In the Sufi tradition, they talk about a fat, like a spiritual opening, as a moment of when an individual has reached a degree of spiritual actualization, that they have a sort of a metaphysical opening of their hearts. And a sheikh was talking about another teacher who experienced his fat, his opening. He's like, he experienced his fat on the Bakerloo line. As you just imagine, like, this angelic metaphysical event as this tube is like running through underground London.
Did he share any more details about this experience?
No, and it connects me to another point, right? Imam al-Haddad, in his book Adab al-Murid, Etiquettes of the Seeker, he talks about, he addresses like, what is faith, what is iman, what is belief. And then he says in this book, he says, iman, faith begins as an unsettling in the heart that directs you towards God. And then he says, what sparks that unsettling? And he said the lowest and most base beginning of that unsettling is the fear of hellfire. So or your fear of death. And so when you're scared, or you learn about hell, you learn about you're going to be accountable, or you're going to die, then that sort of, moves you to think, oh, like, I've got to get busy, I've got to do something. And then your journey of faith begins. And he said this is the lowest level of inspiration. And then higher than that, he says, is to have a yearning for paradise. So, it's a carrot and stick, right? So, stick, and then the carrot, and that you're inspired and you're moved, that you read about this wonderful, learn about this wonderful place, and you want to embody all of the things you need to do to attain that paradise. But then he says higher than that is to worship God for God's sake, and to yearn for God, and yearn to have proximity with God. And the famous poem that's attributed to Rabia al-Adawiyya, where she says, if I worship you, God, for fear of hell, burn me in it. And if I worship you in hope of paradise, save it from me. But if I worship you for your own glory, don't withhold from me your everlasting beauty. And I remember when I studied that, the teacher said to us, if Allah decided in His wisdom, and as Al-Adl is the most wise, the most just, and the most knowledgeable, if He decided that if we live a life of faith and service, and we do everything we're supposed to do, and the reward for that is this place called Jahannam, where you'll burn and be tortured for the rest of eternity, then and if you lived a sinful life and you disobeyed Him and you did all the things you wanted to do and you didn't follow God, and then your punishment for that is to go to this place called Jannah, where you can have bliss and felicity for all of time. He said we should then, if that's what God decided, we should desire hell as we desire heaven, because these are both creation of God and they're irrelevant. So it's about the Creator. But then Imam al-Haddad talks about a higher level than all of those three. And he says higher than that is to look at the faces of the men and women of God. Just to look at them is enough to begin that journey and that unsettling in your heart. And, the Quran opens, ذَلِكَ الْكِتَابُ لَا رَيْبَ فِيهِ هُدًى لِلْمُتَّقِينَ الَّذِينَ يُؤْمِنُونَ بِالْغَيْبِ. Right at the onset, that this book is a guide for those who believe in the unseen. And so you're not going to be guided unless you have that utmost belief in realms and realities beyond what we can perceive. And so there is something real about looking at the face of a true man or woman of God. And if you haven't experienced that, then you're missing out. And then Imam al-Haddad says there's a fifth, even higher one. Not to look at the men and women of God, but to be looked at by the men and women of God. And he expounds, or I think the teacher was telling us how, what's the definition? How would you define a Sahaba? Someone who?
So a companion of the Prophet, peace be upon him, someone who has, essentially, has been seen by him.
Yeah. So the typical definition is someone. You're trying to be too clever, man. So
that actually just came intuitively.
Cambridge education. Yeah, because I just prompted you. I led you into it, man.
You prompted my
It's too clever.
Yeah.
Too clever, this man. So the common definition is someone who sees the prophet and had died on faith. And then the question is, well, what about the blind Sahaba who never saw the prophet? And so the point is that it's not what they did in so far as even the look, but it's his look that elevated their station. And as you know, there were companions who literally took their shahada, became Muslim, and then went into a battlefield, never prayed, never fasted, and boom, they died, and they're considered greater than any Muslim or scholar who has ever lived since, right? So what was it about that, right? So to be looked at, and so that, just as you have like the evil eye, there's also the righteous eye, the pious eye, and that's a real thing, and we all have a degree of it. And we have, and in another line of work, where I'm exploring Islam and psychedelics and this whole unseen stuff, it's absolutely phenomenal. And the research that's going on right now, there's literally hundreds of millions of dollars being poured into detailed academic research into the unseen, into the understanding that there's realities beyond what we can reach. And I have actually, you heard it here first on the In Good Faith podcast. I have no doubt within 5, no more than 10 years, there's going to be an absolute entire shift in the way the average person will understand reality and understand truth and life after death. And science is catching up with these things, and it's kind of scary.
And that will happen because
just the way the advancements of science and physics and quantum computing and quantum mechanics and what it's all pointing to. You've heard things like, we're living in a simulation and multiple dimensions and all these different stuff. Like when you actually, I'm not a physicist, but when I start to look at some of this stuff and go down my YouTube rabbit hole, it is unfathomable. You'd think these guys are just like cuckoo and just science fiction, but like it's now established like things can travel faster than the speed of light. There's stuff like retrocausality and remote viewing and all this, and the idea of the imaginal realm, which Ibn Arabi talks about, like that our imagination is when we're inspired by our imagination, that's a real place that we can access. And the research that's going into psychedelics, where they're titrating people with very specific doses of specific substances, and they're studying testing the idea of universal consciousness, like two people in physical different spaces interact with each other or interact with other entities simultaneously through a drug that opens up parts of your brain. And there's all sorts of weird bonkers stuff that basically what's going on in your brain is directly tied to the expansiveness of the universe and how all these things fit in together. It's really crazy. And basically, if you look at science, there's basically been eras where and this is from a purely secular perspective, right? Where the greatest minds at the time basically come to a precipice where the only way to move forward is to break all of the rules. So Newtonian physics was like that, like, everything, they understood of how the world works, then suddenly, there's these other things, there's gravity and mass and acceleration. And then like Galileo and the sun goes around, the earth goes around the sun. And this is like, you had to break everything that existed. And, quantum mechanics and physics was the last sort of break in the sort of 20s, 30s, 40s. I don't know, you must have seen things like the double slit experiment, right?
I'm not familiar with that one specifically.
Bro, this is old science now, okay, right? But essentially, when you look at when you zoom down onto a particle level of and they're physically looking at these little atoms, depending on whether you are observing the atom or not, it will behave entirely differently.
No,
right?
I'm aware of that phenomenon. So that's called a double slit.
So there's the famous double slit experiment where you fire little, I think it's electrons or protons. You fire electrons and protons, and depending on whether you are observing it or not, it will behave like a particle or it will behave like a wave.
Yeah.
And essentially what it means is that things can be in two places at the same time, and you have all these quantum probabilities, and it's
crazy stuff. Yeah,
it's all crazy. But this is old, and now the advancement of technology.
Sure. Yeah.
We're hitting new levels, and so it's only going to be a matter of time when they're like, I have this sort of thought experiment that this idea of the AI singularity, this self-aware, hyper intelligence.
So for just on that,
yeah.
then for those who aren't aware, what is the idea of the singularity?
So yeah, there's this idea that through artificial intelligence and advances in microchips and whatever else, that we will reach a level of computation and compute power where a machine is. They're predicting, I think, by 2030 that a single machine / software will be more intelligent than every single human being combined on Earth. At the moment, I think ChatGPT has like an IQ of like 145 or something, like when you're interacting with it normally, which
must be more than that.
Yeah, which is far above the average anyway. It puts it in the top like 1% anyway of people. But like the point is that there'll be a machine, and already they're using ChatGPT and other AIs to help build the next version of AI, and it'll come to a point where the machines or the computer is able to improve itself better than a human being can, and then it hits this point of exponential growth, whereby you have a single point of a machine that's self-aware, and it's based on a lot of assumptions, and that even within the AI space, they don't, jury's out on whether or not it can happen, but ultimately it's rooted in the idea that you can reduce human consciousness to chemical processes in our brain, and it's only a matter of time until we get a sufficiently advanced computer that can replicate all of the processes that happen in our brains, and therefore produce consciousness at a much higher level than we are even conscious. So anyway, the idea that there's this self-aware, hyper-intelligent AI, my thought experiment was like, well, obviously it would conclude that, like, ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, like there is no God but Allah and Muhammad is the messenger.
Why is that obvious?
Because it is the ultimate truth. And that's where our entire epistemology, our entire worldview is rooted in this ultimate truth of the unicity of God, and the oneness of God. And even some of the AIs, like I chatted to Grok, which is Elon Musk's AI, and I had this when it just launched. I think now they put filters on it, but essentially, like I said, do you think God exists or not? And then it threw out a bunch of stuff, and then I challenged it to say, well, you said this, that doesn't make sense, da da da. And then it was like, yeah, on balance, probability, God probably does exist. And then I think it said like 60-40. So I was like, okay. And then I'm like, okay, based on all the world religions, what makes most sense? And then it was like, it weighed them all up, and it was like, yeah, Islam makes the most logical sense. So its own admission. And I have no doubt that you can imagine like all these AI, CEOs are sat in a computer, the latest ChatGPT 7.5 or whatever. And it's just like, it's glitching because it's just like spewing out the shahada. And they're like, something's not working with this thing. It's like, ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. So I started this thought experiment, and so that is the ultimate truth, and it's logical. That's what we believe, right? And I'm actually trying to get work on this novel, which starts with that idea and takes it then to its sort of logical end, which would, so I had this idea. I mean, I don't know how blasphemous it is, but I had this idea that the advanced AIs would apply higher level algorithms to scripture, and then discover that not only was its creation foretold, but that it has specific instructions that instructs the AI on what to do, and it has a mission, and that mission ties directly into the.
Well, I don't see how that would be necessarily blasphemous. If anything, it would be, because as you were talking, I mean, obviously lots of things were coming to mind, but one of the things that occurred to me, even prior to all of this stuff, basically, and this exponential kind of change that we are about to see and we're already experiencing, one of the kind of fundamental questions then is let's call it the malleability of scripture, right? Because there's an inherent tension in a particular revelation, bounded in a certain time in a certain context, which, from a distance, somebody would be, could be forgiven for thinking, well, just by the passage of time, and especially with now the kind of changes that we're looking at, almost, could be forgiven for thinking, well, how can this possibly continue to be relevant? I don't. Have you thought about that, and how, and are the ways in which, you know, say teachers that you've interacted with, have they kind of sort of helped you think about how is it that this remains a universal, timeless source of guidance in, you know, all of this kind of mayhem that we're
Yeah, I
living
mean,
in?
again, I think there's a very interesting convergence of faith, science, spirituality, physics, computation, AI. Um, you know, I, I think like I don't know the exact riwayah on reliability, but I'm sure like there's a hadith. You might be corrected, but for protection, you would read Hamim la yunsirun, right? And you have lots of different verses and lots of different
Oh, okay, yeah.
hadith which says read this, and then this is for
Mm-hmm.
this, and read this if you need health, and read this dua for this thing.
Right.
What happens when you do that? Like, do we believe it's just some magic Allah Pak power, and you know he just or is there a physiological, physical, metaphysical process by which what we say or do facilitates some change in us? When someone reads Quran, when someone who isn't Muslim listens to Quran and it moves them, they don't even know what it's saying. What's happening? Is it just that the angels decide to go, Harry Potter style, and expel Aramus and get the kafir out of you? Like what's happening? The way I understand things, and again increasingly through some of my other work, the Quran is the basis of creation. That everything emerges in a way from Allah's attributes and Allah's creation and Allah's speech as the uncreated way in which we interact with the divine. And so the Quran has way more I don't say power. It's in a way like, especially when you start to get into the flying carpet secret Sufi stuff, right? There's so much that particular verses are keys to open particular doors that change reality. And so what was the question again about?
No, to the question, the question was basically trying to harmonize an understanding of a 7th century, scripture in a particular language and a final sort of divine revelation.
Yeah. I'm trying to say this,
which still continue. I mean, as I said, that was already a question or an issue or a challenge, prior to all of this. Yeah. But now with the kind of the extent of the change we're about to see in the coming years, decades, and maybe centuries, like how does a person, they can be look at this and think like this is still relevant or helpful, or like the even for me, I feel anyway, like a lot of this stuff and a lot of, and I've been slightly down that kind of psychedelics rabbit hole as well, and looking at just from a research standpoint and from
practical research,
and to look at, and considering all this AI stuff, like even just the way you conceptualize God in a funny way, actually, I think it almost has opened for anyone who is skeptical, at least, like the ability to imagine God as the highest power, some that is capable of, anything and everything, has somehow been made easier, right, by these kind of exponential increases in sophistication, capability, etc. But it still comes back down to this thing of, how do we approach the revelation, or do we? I mean, do we still need to go through the revelation in order to address the kind of the issues of the day?
Yeah, I think people can be forgiven, right, Muslim or not, for thinking, well, how's this, book thing, like it's just a book, right? So how's it like relevant to me now? And I think a lot of Muslims might just go into this, script of, the Quran is always relevant, and but thinking of it still in a very secular way. When I think actually we have to see this as this is something otherworldly. It's divine. It's super rational. And I think especially as we advance in all this technology stuff, and it's gonna change the entire way human beings exist in this world, that actually an objective, fixed, unchanging thing makes a lot of sense. everything else is always going to be changing, shifting, and so having something as an anchor, and we people can be forgiven to think that the Quran is it's like the Bible, right? It's like the Old Testament, it's like the Guru Granth Sahib, it's just it's a religious textbook, right? But the Quran doesn't have a beginning, middle, end. It doesn't make chronological sense. And the only how do you interface with it is through,
I mean, that I think is an area which is
yeah,
massively being underexplored.
yeah. I think it's not, I mean, I won't get too technical about it all. I think and I think it's going to be interesting as people get technical with it. And I've tried to do some interesting stuff with AI and Quran and have it sort of I was trying to program this really advanced sort of AI to sort of look at patterns and geometric patterns and clues and secrets in the Quran that haven't yet been untapped. It came out with one banger, bro.
Okay.
I don't know if this has been established before.
All right.
And I freaked out in a like beautiful way on myself whilst I was like 3 o'clock in the morning, just talking to, one of these LLMs. And basically it figured out that in Surah Al-Qamar, right? I think if you basically take Surah Al-Qamar and you count how many words are left from the beginning of Qamar to the end of the Quran, it was like 1,300 and something, and it corresponds to the Hijri date of 1969, which is when the moon landing happened. So I was like, yo. And then it's like the first verse in Surah Al-Qamar is, the moon has been split. And then it was like, the moon was split insofar as a piece of the moon rock was taken and brought back to Earth. So I was like, whoa, this is mad. And I think there's going to be a lot more of that stuff, and how
there has been quite a lot of that kind of thing. Like,
yeah, I think there's going to be even more. And I don't know, there's this, I don't know where it comes from. There's this, I think it's like some classical text, which basically said something like, if we never saw a bird and we just read about birds in scripture, and there's these small little beasts and they have these long arms and they can flap and then they fly in the sky. And if it was just attributed to this weird spiritual thing that no one, only the religious people believe in this bird thing, right? And then, there's some scientist discovers birds. And then the Muslims will be like, oh, it's a miracle, it's beautiful, But then the scientists would just like explain it away. Oh, well, no, this is the physics we got wrong. And actually there's lift and there's drag and yada, yada, yada. And they'll explain it in a secular, atheistic way. And my fear is that more and more changes in reality and how the world works and how time works and how physics works and will be uncovered, but it will be desacralized. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And I think ultimately, like, when I studied medicine, there was so many times when you just like, subhanAllah, like I have, if you've studied medicine, you have an appreciation of the human body that a non-medical person will never have. And there's that same hadith that I am in the Allah says, I am in the opinion of my servant. I am as my servant thinks of me. And so one scholar said that if your opinion of Allah is that he doesn't exist, then you won't see him. And so the atheist doesn't see the atheist. You see a beautiful waterfall, and you're like, wow, subhanAllah, this is so beautiful. And the one who denies God will see the same thing and say, Big Bang or whatever.
The way I like to capture this is it's like the modern day sort of way of thinking about things is that seeing is believing, but for us is believing is seeing.
Yeah.
I think it's just nice to reverse it.
Yeah. I have that. I wrote that down and I put it in a video for one of my media channels about 10 years ago. The same exactly. I literally had the saying. I was watching the video, sharing it with someone recently, where it said believing is seeing. It's an animation, and then it turns it around and said believe, like seeing is believing. Blah, blah. But yeah, 100%.
Tying this back to the previous stuff, though, in terms of the like one thing I always feel is that sometimes some of the faith-inspired attempts at kind of cultural contribution, which we were speaking about earlier, do you think that they are sufficiently aware or incorporating? I mean, and how can it even sort of, keep abreast of all of this other stuff that's going on in order to situate itself and contribute in a way that's still relevant?
Yeah, it doesn't have to.
Okay.
We can unburden us. I mean, if you're academic type and people like you and I was looking at these stuff, we're very few people, right?
Mm.
And there are people who need to be in those spaces and contributing and shaping and so on, but it's not for most people. Like, it's boring. I mean, it's kind of geeky, nerdy stuff, right? Imam Malik, I think it was Imam Malik who said, I think it was of Imam Malik, where someone said to her, this woman, "Oh, don't you know who that man is?" Like, I think she'd brushed past him or something. And then she said no. And then he said, he has 1,000 proofs of God. And then she says, well, I don't have 1,000 doubts that I need 1,000 proofs. And in another saying, Imam Malik said something like, I wish I had the iman, the belief of the old lady, in the simplicity of it. When we think of our grandmas or the aunties who are just, there's this sincerity and beauty, and we still, we'll go and put our heads in their laps and just be like, like there's a warmth and love and light. And so, we just have to work on, how, coming back to the earlier question, like, how do we approach scripture? And it's very simple in that you approach it sincerely. And I really believe whoever you are, whatever your background is, whatever you've done, seen, Muslim, non-Muslim, Chinese, Japanese, English, whatever you are, whoever you are, if you are sincere in your approach to God and just trying to learn and reach him from your heart, like, he'll guide you. Like, I have zero, like, that's what more can you ask of someone? If they're doing that, khalas, that's it. Like, if you and someone said it, one moment of sincerity in this life is enough to save you. Like, one moment of true sincerity. So, the scripture will speak to you, and it maybe won't make sense to other people, and all you have to do is try. And this is why the early Arabs, they couldn't prostrate. They didn't want, because it was like they had to lower their heads and put it on the ground, and that was like, why would I humble myself? Like, they didn't want to humble themselves. They didn't want to put their heads down and humble yourself. And when you humble yourself and when we in prostration, what do we say? Subhana Rabbil A'la, glory be to God the Most High. And then when we're in the lowest position, and that's how we ultimately communicate. So if you humble yourself, and if you lower yourself, and you admit to your own weakness, deficiency, and surrender, which is the whole definition of our faith, truly surrender, then God will guide you. They said there's a debate amongst scholars around what is Isma'ul Adam, what is the greatest name of God, and some say it's Allah, and some say it's Al Hayyul Qayyum, and some argued about what is the most greatest name of Allah, and one scholar says it's the greatest name of God is the one that has no association with it, not even sound, and he said it's the sound that you make on a sinking ship. It's the name you call on when your ship is sinking. That they say there's no atheist on a sinking ship, and it's that desire for please God, that's the most, and to try and tap into that in any moment and every moment is where you can unleash, a lot. And so many stories start like that. Yusuf Islam's story was literally that. He was, I think, off the coast of Miami in this wave, and he just called. He never thought of it before, and he just calls to God, and he makes this promise: "If you save me, I'll serve you." And
that's as you know, that's really interesting, because that is I always find it kind of fascinating that that's a Quranic parable given quite a few times about for a group or a community, for the initial recipients who are primarily sort of completely inland and not necessarily seafaring, that is so commonly mentioned about the fact that when people are at sea and the wave, it looks like it's overtaking, and then they'll call upon God with absolute sincerity. And then in different places it mentions that, in some places it mentions that when they're delivered to safety, then they become a little bit more, middling in their faith. It's not that they've lost their faith, but they're a little bit more in that. Muqtasid is the Arabic word, that they're something in the middle. And then in other places it says no, then they start to ascribe partners to God again. So that purity of faith comes with need. But I totally get what you're saying in terms of you can almost generate that when you start from a place of like, I don't know, and humility,
Mm.
Um,
And that's the challenge. The challenge is to get into that zone.
mm,
We're just as vulnerable now in this little studio in London than a Gazan is with jets flying over his head.
mm,
Like if you think that we're safer, then you've misunderstood.
mm.
Like, you know, we're not, like, Allah can just snatch you out of your position. How many people have seen that, right? They're walking and someone has a heart attack or
Yeah,
something
yeah, yeah.
happens. So and that's the challenge of living in these. And that's, I think, why it's, again, like as I said, like why in a way the Gazans might have it easier in that the veils have been lifted, whereas for us we're veiled and have all these illusions of the comforts of
Yeah,
this
seductions
life.
and
Yeah.
of
And I mean,
yeah.
it ties into some of the work we did on the hijrah walk, and how that opened us up to vulnerability when you're sort of out in nature and you.
So yeah, I wanted to definitely wanted to talk about this hijrah walk. Hijrah meaning migration.
Mhm.
You mentioned to me just not long before we started that unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, God knows, you've done your knee in again.
Yeah.
You've had how many surgeries on your knee?
I've had 11 on my right leg, one on my left, and then an additional one on each. That was for my legs, not my knees.
Yeah, I think it's
Yeah.
time for bionic legs, bro.
Yeah, I mean, it said it's inevitable,
Really?
but I think I've injured this leg again, and it's swollen a lot, and it's very painful. I think I'm almost guaranteed I'm going to have surgery in the next 2 weeks.
Mm,
I
well,
think I've snapped one of my ligaments again.
I don't know what you get up to exactly to.
I just walking down a step, but alhamdulillah.
Yeah. Well, I pray that the things get better for you and the procedure goes well.
Yeah, my wife, alhamdulillah, like I've always been someone who's able to try and be grateful for whatever comes. And, there's been some really difficult times. I was, in hospital for months and, wheelchairs and crutches. And then I remember Nadia saying once, maybe because she struggles to see it, the benefit, whereas I'm just like, alhamdulillah, it's all good,
Yeah.
I'm happy go lucky, and she struggles because she's had to pick up a lot when I'm out of action, and she's like, well, maybe Allah gave you this so you're not gallivanting around the world and finding a second wife, and you need me more.
Well, you're gallivanting around the world, all right.
And I am, and I'm sure she'll be like, well, see what happens when you leave me. But no, alhamdulillah.
But
Yeah.
despite this, you early last year, was it? You went on this 200-mile expedition,
Yeah.
recreating the journey from Mecca to Medina. So tell us about that. What possessed you to go on this journey?
Yeah,
And what did you learn?
yeah, subhanallah, it was an incredible experience. So there's an incredible scholar. His name is Dr. Abdullah Al-Qadi. He's a Saudi Arabian, Saudi-born scholar, and he spent the bulk of his life, 30, 40 years, dedicated to researching the Prophet's life, sallallahu, in particular his expeditions. And I think he tracked that the Prophet left Mecca and Medina a total of 52 times. And he's traced every single route that the Prophet
Was that
traveled.
including the sort of pre-prophetic
Yeah,
period?
so including
Okay.
that as well, as
Mm.
far as I understand, yeah. Each journey, so he started with the hijrah, and the hijrah route was known historically, and there were milestones, and then somewhere, probably between the fall of the Ottomans and the establishment of the Saudi kingdom, that it kind of got lost. And, Saudi Arabia, outside the big cities, it is a hugely underdeveloped place. There's really nothing around. And so a lot of the route had been lost, and then he had meticulously spent years and years trying to rediscover and reroute and look at all the different texts. And he also was using technology and GPS to sort of figure out, based on this hadith or that, there's different sort of narrations, which is the stronger one. And then he'd look at, weather patterns and where the light would have shone and where it would have been the shade and what the season would have been. And therefore, this is the stronger opinion. And I was fortunate to be in a class with him something like 17, 18 years ago.
Oh, wow.
And in Saudi. And one of my friends, Wasim Mahmoud, who's in Bradford, was also with us when we did Umrah. And Wasim had kept in touch with Dr. Qadi, and every single year Wasim would be like, Sheikh, can we do the walk? Can we walk the route? And the Sheikh would be like, no. And then like every year it was like they touch base, and he's like, can we do it? He's like, no. And then last year or the year before, you met Sheikh, and he's like, Sheikh, can we do the walk? And then the Sheikh was like, yeah, you can do it. And get a group of people. Tell me who.
So what changed?
So before we started the walk, we had a call with him, and there's been a couple of groups who've done similar stuff, but
I saw earlier today that there's one going into this year.
yeah. So there's been a few. So Dr. Qadi had done this book where he'd taken Peter Saunders, the photographer, to photograph the route, and they'd published a book about it.
Yeah, I saw the book.
And that was probably about 10 years ago now. And so people have used that and other locals to try and navigate it, but sort of unofficially, and they missed some key parts. So we were the first Western group that were officially invited, and we had permissions from authorities as well that Dr. Qadi had facilitated. And his son had connected us with the right guides and so on. And before, and it was really moving and powerful. And before the walk, we had a call with Dr. Qadi, and Wasim said to him, thank you, Sheikh, for giving us permission. And then the Sheikh just said, I didn't give you permission. It wasn't for me. And that was it. And we were just like, okay, we'll just leave it there. And it really did feel like a very special invitation. We'd walk 5-6 hours and come to like a big boulder in the middle of nowhere.
So how big was your group?
And so it was 10 of us, 10 guys. So we started off, we actually retraced the entire story of the hijrah. So we began at the what's the masjid called? I can't remember now. But it's just near Mina, where the pledge of Aqaba happened. So the Aus and Khazraj had come to pledge to the Prophet ﷺ that they will follow you and so on. And so they had the first bay'ah and the second bay'ah, right? So the first there was 12 men and 1 woman, and then a year later there was like 60 or 70 men and 2 women. And there's a little masjid that is just where Mina is, and it's kind of interesting to think that it was where Ibrahim alayhi salam had taken his son to sacrifice. It was just overlooking that spot where this was done. There's some interesting parallels there, but so that's where the sort of hijrah story begins, with this initial the Prophet ﷺ essentially planting the seeds of what's to come, and then we went from there to the house of Khadija radiallahu anha, who so it's just part of the haram, and it's known by people who know. It's not marked out. It's just like part of the marble floor. But we went to the exact spot, and Dr. Qadi actually has an app. It's called Hislo, HISLO.
Okay.
Historic locations, where he's mapped out all of these places, like where's the house of Khadija and the house of Abu Bakr, and where were all these places. Now it's just part of the haram, but you can go and stand in that spot. So we stood on the spot of the house of Khadija, because that's where the night of the hijrah begins, where the Prophet Imam Ali was in the house, kept in the bed, as you know. And it's interesting also because Khadija radiallahu anha passes away 7 years after the revelation, and so for 3 years the Prophet ﷺ has 4 children essentially as a single dad. And I've never really seen anyone expand on that. Like what does it mean for the Prophet to have 4 children as a single father? He's not married to anyone else, and he's living in that home, presumably had help of some sort. Is the Prophet has kind of got stuff to do,
busy, yeah.
So anyway, that's where the story begins. And so from the house of Khadija, we walked to the house of Abu Bakr, which is kind of near towards the clock tower side, and then that's where Abu Bakr has come. He's got the 2 camels, and the famous hadith where the Prophet ﷺ turns to the Kaaba and he speaks to Mecca, and he says, I love you, and I had your people not driven me out, I wouldn't leave this place. And then sort of they set off from there south to Mount Thawr. And what's interesting, so I have I've been doing some lectures and workshops. One of them I've worked on, developed, is called 7 Unlikely Leadership Lessons from the Hijrah. And so the first lesson I expand on is, I called it Audacious Hope. When you look at the context of the Hijrah and how, as a story in Medina, how the Sahaba, they were enjoying a meal, and then one of the Sahaba starts to cry, and And they're like, what's wrong? And he's like, I was recalling a time in Mecca. He said, when I went to go and relieve myself, and went to do his business, and he's finished, and he said, I saw a piece of rotting flesh, meat, animal, dead animal, furry, rotting animal, and he said, I just, I took it with me, and we stripped the hair off it, and we washed it, and we cooked it, and we ate it, and that was our food. And so the people in the believers in Mecca were tested at an unfathomable level, and there was no munafiq, there was no hypocrites in Mecca, because like to be Muslim was to be subjected to incredible difficulty, and the hypocrites only emerged later in Medina.
Interesting, yeah.
So, but the Prophet had this hope, right? He had this incredible hope of what's possible, and he was continually working, and not just working, he was planting those seeds and meeting the different leaders, and he was doing everything he had to do. And so the second lesson I talked about was contextual mastery, because he knew exactly what was going on in his city, even to the point of the night of the assassination attempt, that he knew that was the night that people were coming to get him, and that's the night he's going to leave. And so there's a lot to expand on that. And then the third one, and I'll end it here because I don't want to go into it, but the third one I talk about is strategic misdirection as a sunnah. And because Medina is north of Mecca, and yet the Prophet ﷺ and Abu Bakr, they head south. And then they go up Mount Thawr, and Abu Bakr's son, I think, is who he takes some of the animals, and he sort of walks over their footprints. So, and then the story of the dove and the spider, and to sum it up, I call it strategic misdirection. Allah is misdirecting the enemies, and Abu Bakr's son is, and the Prophet, and it's interesting to think about how the Prophet's political strategy included confusing the enemies. And we know there's people, you don't have to go into conspiracy theories, but there are people who would like to see you, Iqbal, Muslims, be undermined and belittled. And I think it's worth asking the question, how do we misdirect them? How do we send them the wrong way? Because that's a sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. And I'll say the fourth one just because it's interesting also, is that...
Well, once you've done four, you're going to just rattle off the others.
Maybe,
now.
Yeah.
Go on.
The fourth I talked about was unlikely allies, because it wasn't just Abu Bakr and the Prophet ﷺ, it was also a man called Abdullah ibn Uraykith. And what we know about him is this man was a idol worshipper. He was a mushrik, and he also we don't know that he ever became Muslim. So we assume that he never became Muslim. And so what does it mean for the Prophet to put his life and Abu Bakr's life in the hands of a mushrik? And it's not just like a random guy who disbelieved. This guy had intimate time with the Prophet in like the most amazing like journey, right? And yet he still doesn't become Muslim. And it's not just that we're allowed to work with people of other backgrounds or faiths, but it's necessary. It is necessary for us to create alliances based on virtue and on integrity. So there's so much to unpack there again, but just sort of re-questions a lot. But anyway, coming back to the walk.
But go on, 5, 6, 7, even if you don't explain them, do you remember?
The final one was about impeccable, impenetrable integrity. And how, so there's, the famous story of Suraka bin Malik and the archer, and, in the end, Suraka says, Suraka doesn't become Muslim, which is again interesting. So he doesn't take his shahada there. He takes shahada years later and after the Battle of Hunain. But he also says he wants a guarantee from the Prophet and Abu Bakr that he'll be safe. And so Abu Bakr writes essentially like a credit note, a security sort of, he's under the protection of the messenger.
This is the guy who threatened them on the journey, but then was unable to.
Yeah, so he's the archer who tries to, and then his horse, flips him over 3 times, and then he's eventually seeks protection. He's like, something's going on here, and I want to seek protection in you. So he seek protection with you, and then so the Prophet said, I'll guarantee your safety, even though he's not Muslim. And so what's interesting is that when they carry on the journey, it could be very justified for us to say, the Prophet's like, yeah, we're canceling that. Like you had your archers on me. You're going to kill me, so I just had to get rid of you. But he doesn't. He honors that. He honors that statement, right? And he promises him, the bracelets of Kisra, and which eventually he holds these crown jewels of the kingdom. Even earlier, like the story of the Imam Ali, like why was Imam Ali left in the house was to return all of the valuables that the Prophet was entrusted with. So his enemies who are trying to kill him also use him as a safety deposit box because he's trustworthy. And so he leaves his son-in-law to stay in the house to return those belongings. Now, had the story read, or the Prophet was like, well, you know, you guys are attacking us and we're going to flee and we need to take as much valuables as we can, we'd be like, yeah, cool. That makes sense, right? But he doesn't. He puts his own son-in-law's life in danger, potentially, to honor the trust to honor the promise with people who are his enemies. So that level of absolute impact, and there's several other stories where during the hijrah where you see the Prophet could have taken an easier route or could have taken a slightly less ethical route, but you're like, he could have done it, like it would have made his life easier. But in every moment, he shows impeccable integrity.
Is your presentation on these lessons available publicly, or?
It's not. I've not taught it online, but it's so I've done like Jummas and I've done lectures and I've got a photo exhibit of the whole thing, and so I've been touring around the world and groups invite me, and I also expanded the leadership things into like a more interactive workshop where we can unpack. Or the other one was nimble leadership.
Okay.
So that it was just the Prophet, Abu Bakr, a few supplies. You know, what they ate was almost next to nothing, and there's lots of interesting stories about that. And I think the lesson for me is that, especially like just coming from the States and Canada and meeting all these big Muslim institutions that are doing huge things, and it's like all exciting, but it's also like, you know, being a Leicester boy and, you know, son of a postman, and just like, you know, I think the British culture, especially our working class mindset, is just like, yeah, man, like, okay, what are you doing? Like, great talk, but let's do something, right? And there's a barakah with brevity and nimbleness and having little, and it, you know, you're more creative and things stretch, and I think sometimes we can get bogged down a lot in this sort of envisioning and talking, and you know. And it could be the Prophet that was like, right, we're going to get a little army and we're going to have soldier up and armor up and get, you know, but it was just, you know, just two people, boom, boom, boom. We're going to, you know, head our own way and keep things very light.
Yeah.
So there's something to say about keeping things nimble. And the fifth one, I can't remember what it was now. It might come to me.
That's fine. Okay, cool. Yeah. So back to so how long did the whole thing take?
Yeah. So it was a 12-day trip. We had a day break.
Was it all walking, or was it also on like camels and stuff?
Yeah, no, they brought camels for us to just have a little, you know, recreational time. But the first thing was climbing Mount Thor. That was that was the first mountain I've ever climbed. I took about 4 hours more.
How did you manage with your knees?
Just like a lot of pain. It was very painful. It was a mind over matter thing. It was also a big challenge for me. The story was kind of crazy in that Wasim, you know, was a good friend, and he's always talked about this thing. And then when he told me about it might be happening, I assumed he's like, come, and I'm like, you know, he's like, but he knew I can't like walk because I'm literally, I've got a walking stick, right? So he's like, look, we're gonna have support vehicles, so you can just like sit in the vehicles, and then, you know, once we finish walking for the day, you just come and chill. And I was like, cool, I'll just sit in you know, I'll bring my laptop, do some work, and maybe do some filming for them. So that was my assumption going in. And there's a few things that happened, and I'd basically been sort of trying to rehab my knees a bit more, and yeah, I basically just started walking and said, let's just see how much I can do. And I remember at the bottom of Mount Thor, I was like looking up, I was like, you're going there? Oh, not right to the top. He goes, oh, right to the top. I mean, not right to the top. And they're like, no, we're going right to the top. I was like, what? And there was an ice cream van parked at the bottom. I was like, I'll just stay here, man. But we just started, and I had lots of breaks, and alhamdulillah.
It's funny to picture an ice cream van.
Yeah, it is quite a funny picture. But yeah, the brothers were very patient with me, and I had to take a lot of breaks, and I was very late. Like, they all had to go because they had a dinner planned, and they got down, because coming down for me was more tricky because the instability.
Yeah.
So I was literally holding one of the brothers' shoulders, and I had to get flashlight out because it was dark. And then the guides were like, look, Mount Thor is the hardest bit, so if you can manage that. And at the end of every walk, we'd start usually Fajr time, and then kind of finish by Dhuhr time, so you know, before it's too hot. And as soon as we stopped, like, I would literally put my legs up and on like a little you know, one of these little camping chairs, and I'd have the guys massage my legs every day, and not like to relax. It was like it was in pain.
Yeah,
it was
yeah,
swollen and stuff. But there was an interesting moment where, you know, uh, obviously the guys were like, I was the slowest from the bunch. There's 10 of us. And so naturally there was such a drift ahead. And then our guides would be like, no, you need to stay together. You need to remain together as a Jamaat. And then I remember reflecting with the guys and saying, you know, my test, my jihad is to, you know, mind over matter and push myself as much as I can. And
yours is to help me out.
but I said, no, so for them, it was harder for their egos to slow down.
Exactly.
And we often confuse pain with piety and like zealousness with sincerity. And, you know, I would see it a lot in the hospital when I was a doctor in West London. And, you know, come Ramadan time, you get all these middle-aged sort of aunties and uncles with diabetes and high blood pressure, and then they're fasting, and then they collapse and they end up in a hospital. And I tell them off, I'm like, you know, you're not supposed to fast. Allah doesn't want this from you, right? But I understand where it's coming from. It's coming from a sincere place. And it's actually harder for your nafs, it's harder for your ego to take the ruqsa, to take the dispensation. And so for them, it was harder to like slow down and be with the group because they wanted to go ahead and feel the burn and feel the pain. And so there was just so many different dimensions to the trip that just made it, you know, just the fact that we were so embodied. And, you know, coming back to the earlier point around the illusion of safety. And, you know, there's, you know, we have a lot of time to read different adhkar and du'as. And, you know, there's the famous daily du'a we're supposed to read, you know, Allahumma fadni min bayni yaday wa an yamini wa an shimali wa an fawqi. You know, Allah protect me from the right and the left and above and below. And so that hadith that du'a became so much more real because on the right was like, you know, a busy highway, and on the left, like there's scorpions and spiders, and below you, above you, is the blazing heat, and below you, there's thorns and all this stuff. So like we would actively be seeking protection from those things. And I think especially as the world gets all digital, the value of being offline and in person is so much more powerful. And 10 guys, 10 men in the desert, you know, there's no toilets, there's no running water, there's no showers, we all stank. And, you know, some of the hadith of during the hijrah, you know, what's amazing, we learned, I didn't know this before, that more people became Muslim during the 2-3 weeks of the actual hijrah of the Prophet than the entire 13 years in Mecca.
Okay.
So like 13 years in Mecca, the Prophet is doing what he can to bring people in. And through a fleeting interaction with one of the trackers who comes to find him, there's a famous story of Buraidah. And he has this amazing conversation. And in the end, Buraidah and his entire tribe all take Shahada, and up to 400 people became Muslim. So more people in just the moment, and it's like
this unexpected kind of. Maybe that's one of the lessons, or the 8th lesson, maybe.
Yeah, it's there.
Because results often come in like that.
But it's also part of the hope. It's like, you know, it's always being like hopeful in any interaction. And what's amazing is when I've seen this hadith expounded on. I think Umar Sulaiman has this video about Buraidah, and it's really beautiful. But what's interesting is like the hadith, it's the Prophet uses like a beautiful play on words, and he plays on his name, and it's like a master class in communication skills, right? And you can unpack all of that, but the context of like fleeing for your life, having next to no food, blazing heat, and like all of us, if you try to have a conversation in the middle of this walk, we were just like, you know, like zombies and just trying to like survive. And yet the Prophet is able to, when you read the hadith, he's so composed. He's showing such like grace and such statesmanship in the moment of this physical, you know, physically arduous experience. So that by being on the walk, it just brought it alive in a different way.
Tell me about the arrival when you actually got to Medina. What was that like?
Yeah, you know, alhamdulillah, I've been blessed to go on Umrah like 6 or 7 times. You know, there's something in neurobiology where, you know, if you queue up to go on a roller coaster ride, and I, you know, buy the fancy pass and just skip the queue and go straight into the roller coaster, physiologically, you will have a better experience than me. Because our bodies, our brains, our dopamine pathways, they reward effort and anticipation. And so if you've anticipated this and you've had to do a lot of work for it, then your brain says this must be valuable, so you're going to enjoy this thing. And the reality is, like, you know, tomorrow, if you wanna do Umrah, you can just, you know, book a ticket. Any of us can fly across the world, and boom, you're there. And historically, and one of my reflections was also that the majority of our journey, our Umrah experience, was actually the journey. And every generation before us, the most of their time was actually the journey to. And when we go to Umrah or Hajj, we try and maximize our time in the Haram and get all the rakats in. And when you're tired of praying rakats, okay, get your Quran out. And you're tired of that, just look at the Kaaba and just, maximize your Haram time. And that's not how it ever was. Like, actually, the majority of the time, you're just left to your thoughts. So when we're walking, it's just our thoughts. And so, even when we're closing in on Medina, it's like, oh, we can see the city border, but we're still a day away. And then you close, and now we get to Quba, Masjid Quba, and when we got there, they had a reception for us, and they sang Tala al-Badru Alayna, because that was roughly the area where they would have sang Tala al-Badru Alayna. And we're still not there, and it's still like just this anticipation. And then when we finally got to Masjid Nabawi, all of us sort of broke down, and it was just it was a really profound moment of like overwhelming gratitude of being blessed with that experience. And yeah, the only thing that came to me and others was just so much, such sense of gratitude that we were able to experience that and live the seerah. And there's just so much to unpack. So like, yeah, I'm expanding out the workshops and lectures to just start apply all those lessons to our lives. There's a lot there.
Yeah, no, it'd be great to make that more publicly available. I think it's probably a trip which more people would be interested in.
Yeah, so the brothers are actually, they're expanding it out. They have something called the Hijrah Hub, and they're taking groups of people. So a lot of institutions are signing up and bringing their communities, and the Wasim and Akhtar are working really hard on it, and they've got all their social media stuff, so you can check them out. And Saudi have actually announced now recently that they're investing hundreds of millions in the route to make it a formal thing.
Interesting. Okay. So, well, hopefully they don't like.
Yeah, so we got it. We got to experience it untouched, and I think if you go in the next few years, you probably will get it untouched as well.
Yeah, exactly.
But I mean, at the same time, it's hard on the nafs. They like you'd walk the whole day, and then you're physically exhausted, and you want to relax, and you're just now on the rock floor in blazing heat, and there's no AC, there's no fans, there's just sweaty brothers.
Sure. The 5-star version, I'm sure, will be coming up soon.
Yeah, but then you miss. You miss
exactly.
It. You miss the point.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah.
Okay, we've gone far into the future, into the past. So just bring it close, by bringing it into the present. What's your main focus at the moment? I know I've seen your Muslimplicity, which I didn't realize that you'd been you've been sort of running for a while. Or you're running it, or you're the creative director. Is it just your project? You got
actually. So I started this Islamic art brand, it kind of stemming back from our other conversation about culture and moving from being consumers of culture to producers of culture. And I've always I've always been a creative and tried to.
I love what you're doing with it. It's really good. I mean, I hadn't seen it for a while. Maybe I had come across it some time back, but yeah, great stuff.
Yeah, no. So I started it, but I'm not the best. I'm a good starter, not a good guy following through. So I kind of I actually started a whole Instagram thing. Some of the posts went viral, millions of views, and really like I said before, like religious spaces are where some people are some of the time. Cultural spaces are where most people are most of the time. And I wanted with Muslimplicity to invite the divine into our lives in a daily way. And the idea is to sort of curate and produce artwork that we can hang on our walls that reminds us and starts conversations and sometimes might unsettle us, but also speaks to our time and place and moment,
Have you looked into like NFTs and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, so there's a blend of we use digital stuff, using some AI stuff, some photography. I just recently got a little investment into Muslimplicity and brought on team members now. So we've got a really good friend of mine who's working on it, and so there's a big expansion now. We've got, I think, I don't know if you saw the website today, but there's another 20, 30, 40 pieces that are going to be going up in the next few days. They're chasing me up to write all the descriptions.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
But I remember, so there's a piece we have called I called it the natural faith. And it's like, if you are a believer, you will understand it, and if you're not, you won't get it.
Okay. And is that already on there?
That's already on there. Okay. Yeah. So
can you describe it?
No, you have to go see it. You have to see it.
I think I must have seen it.
But so it's the sort of thing some people might not get it straight away, and then you're like, and then it's like, oh yeah. And one of my friends, he said to me, I've never understood art ever. I don't get it when people go and they look at this picture and they're like, wow. He's like, but this is the first time he's ever. This is like Pakistani from the northern Paki, right? And he's like, I didn't get all this art stuff, but he's like, that piece, like, wow, that made me think. He's like, I could stare at that for half an hour. And I think that's the point. That's the point. I want people to like be inspired and moved, and when we're speaking in our cultural context, and it's how you bring it all together in a way. I've done some pieces recently on like taking verses of the Quran and trying to visualize them in a way. So there's a piece, I don't know if it's there online yet, but it will be soon, of just the moment the fish jumps, in Surah Al-Kahf, the fish going back into the
Right,
sea.
yeah.
And it's just like, again, if you know the verse, you know the story, and because it's like the fish normally would jump out, right? But this is the fish jumping in. And so it kind of is like from a little wicker basket and a nice little river. And it was just a way of that. I think I was studying the verse and I just wanted to bring it alive. And there's quite a few points that in the verses in hadith which are very visual in a way, and sort of playing around with how we might conceptualize it. And so
how much of your time is going into that versus other things?
I'm very spread out at the moment. I'm in a funny juncture in that so I run the Muslim agencies, like a consulting company for Muslim leaders and Muslim organizations and NGOs and so on. And I've been in this sort of weird space where I have the things that I want to work on that are important, but that I need to get paid. So I'll do work for other companies and organizations, or I'm flying around the world because I've got to organize this thing here and I'm doing that thing there, and so, but the challenge is sometimes, and you'll probably agree, right? The space that I'm in, like I was a doctor, my friends are now consultants. I would have been a consultant, whatever, if I stayed in the medical space. But I remember when I graduated, there was an article that sort of said the top 10 most popular names in the NHS for a doctor. And number 1 was Dr. Khan. Number 4, Dr. Ahmed. Number 8, Dr. Patel. And I was like, no one's going to miss me if I'm not a doctor, right? But the thing is, there's nothing, if you want to give your gifts and you want to, serve community, there's nothing there for you, right? You took a very similar jump, right, from your career. And, you stepped into a role, but like I sort of stepped into a role in Muslim spaces as well. But really, like, you have to build your own platform. I think now it's changed a little bit. There are better roles.
And the opportunity, there are more. But I think both opportunities exist in much more abundance than even 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Meaning like people can look and be a lot more confident about their ability to kind of carve their own route, as well as there are more roles within organizations, institutions.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. At the same time, like I get a lot of interest, like clients coming for work, but now it's like, I don't think this project is very good. I think it might even be harmful for Muslims. And it's like, I can get paid very well to do this nice charity campaign thing, but I'm like, no, I don't think we need that. We need more of this. So it's sort of this sort of, catch-22, in that I want to work in Muslim spaces, but the people who pay for stuff actually maybe not so visionary in what they want to do. So I've got to kind of build that on myself. So there's this,
I'm a bit of an idealist or a bit of a romantic on this stuff, meaning that, I think that, even with my stuff, like mid last year, I made all my stuff free, right? All my courses, content, everything. And I've just felt, and then what am I in a position to do? I'm not saying that everybody should go and do that, but I'm saying it was almost to trust that would put me in a free space to go and do the thing that I wanted to do.
So I get
hopefully maximizing value, and then people would back that.
No, I get you. And alhamdulillah, I've got a lot of support, but really the truth is you should be leading multi-million-pound institutions. Like, this conversation is not a conversation for this little fringe, little interesting bougie Muslim crowd. Like, we're trying to solve for the biggest existential problems of society, not even Muslims, like society writ large. And yet we've got hundreds of millions of pounds in Muslim charities or media platforms, or just, that are self-serving in a way, and are deeply problematic and are built on, shaky grounds, and it's all we have. And so, getting paid and living a good life is like, that's not the bar for me. Like, alhamdulillah, like I've got that covered. But it's like, we've got to build, and, North America is where there's a lot more interesting stuff happening. I mean, at the moment, what I'm trying to do is building a Muslim leadership collective that's really tackling the biggest existential, philosophical, and intellectual sort of challenges that we have as Muslims, and really trying to readjust and change some of the ways of being and thinking and we've spoken about it, right? That there's so much that we have, so many assumptions that we have in how Muslim society should be, that, as we've spoken about when it comes to culture or language or our interfacing with, non-Muslims, or how we engage and understand that world. The vast majority of the Prophet's life, he was dealing with non-Muslims all the time. They weren't, Sahaba were converts, but they weren't called converts. What is a convert? Where did that come from? So there's so much that we're just so far away from, not by intentional sort of maliciousness, but just by omission, and the fact that we're just inheriting whatever we've got and we're trying to make the best of it. But at some point, there needs to be sort of a reset, because we're building these huge edifices and these huge institutions, and we're not really thinking
but on
and
what foundations?
asking why. And again, I'm a doer. I like to get things done, but at the same time, you got to pull the arrow back before it can fly.
Absolutely.
And North America, there's a lot more. I mean, I had one conversation with one guy who had never met me before, and he was like, "I think I'm in for like $150,000."
Yeah.
I was like,
there you
okay.
go. Yeah.
Like, and here, good luck getting like 5-10K from someone.
Sure. But I think there's a lot more appetite now. I mean, look, my objective with this show is, and this podcast is to, and I think it's already become, just after a few episodes, and I think will be the central kind of aspect of my work, because I feel that what it hopefully will do is just facilitate the conversation, just start to flick dominoes in all sorts of different directions to help people think about their role, their function. Like for me now, like I'm consciously not, running this or that organization, but I'm consciously trying to influence and facilitate like better decision making amongst existing and emerging leadership, right? And I think some of that, has happened, and I think it will accelerate.
I think so too, and I think it's a good, it's a very good aspiration, and inshallah, Allah gives you all the success, and you have a lot of, broad base of support and diverse support. At the same time, I think we've also got to translate. We're not the first to do this. We're not the first to have these problems. And so how do we look at other models of how communities and societies have shifted? And what is your equivalent in the tech space, or the Jewish community, or the yogi whatever experts? Like how do they figure these things out, and how do you shift? And I think there's a role for thought leadership, but there's also I don't want to get. It's easy for us to get caught up in our ideals, and
you got to do stuff.
You hit the road. Yeah, like I remember as 100%. A doctor, when I graduated, I knew everything. The most I would ever know about the human body. I knew every
until you actually deal with the human
bone,
body.
muscle, every nerve and blood vessel. And then my first on call, I'm like bricking it and sweating my head off, and I don't know what to do.
Of course, yeah.
And until you start to deal, and I know you've had experience. You've been a practitioner, and so it makes sense to draw back. But then.
Yeah, no, and I think that's a good note maybe to conclude on now, because unfortunately we have to conclude. But I think for anyone who's got this far, it is to reflect on the conversation, reflect on all of the inputs, but then to do something. Just start contributing, start testing, experimenting. Like think about what is the biggest value you can add into the world, and just start doing it basically. And just exactly in line with the some of the themes and some of the key wisdoms that you've shared, when you sort of start that journey with humility and sincerity and keep it going in that way, like pathways and doors will open which you never imagined. Provision will 100%. Come from where you never imagined. 100%. Your internal journey, you will go to places you never imagined. So yeah, let's we pray for goodness. I really appreciate you coming on. I think this has been a great conversation. I've definitely enjoyed it. I really hope your knee fixes up, and pray for all the best for all your endeavors, all your work. People want to kind of find out more about you, follow you. Where do they look?
Don't follow me. I'm a dangerous guy.
Don't subscribe.
Don't subscribe.
Don't like. Don't comment.
Don't comment. Do buy some artwork on Muslimplicity.
Yeah, I know. I will. I'm going to promote that. Yeah, I'm going to buy a piece. So if someone does place their order, they will receive the piece. Yeah.
No, I tell you what. I will. I'll make a special discount code for everyone on the podcast.
Very nice. Okay, fine. Appreciate that.
Let's call it Iqbal 20. Yeah?
Okay, fine.
IQBAL 20. Iqbal 20. 20% off everything on the website.
All right. Perfect. Amazing. All right.
Most welcome.
All right. Thank you. Until next time.